I woke up that morning with a flutter in my chest, the kind that only comes when everything feels like a dream finally coming true. The golden light spilling through the curtains felt like a promise, and the scent of peonies from my bouquet was sweet and grounding. Today was my day, the one I had planned so carefully, down to the smallest detail, because I wanted it to feel like a fairy tale. My dress shimmered as I slipped it on, delicate lace and tiny beads catching the light in ways that felt almost magical. I imagined how his eyes would soften the moment he saw me. I had always believed in the power of beginnings, and today felt like the most beautiful one of all. But when I looked at myself in the mirror, there was a flicker in my eyes, a tiny crack of doubt that I quickly smoothed away. I smiled as my maid of honor fussed over my veil, pinning back every stray wisp of hair with the tenderness of a sister. We giggled like we were back in high school, sharing stories about first loves and last chances. Our laughter was a warm blanket, soft and safe, something I could wrap around myself to keep the nerves at bay. Outside, the music started playing. My song, the one that always made my heart swell with hope. I closed my eyes and let the melody carry me, imagining his face when he saw me walk down the aisle. In that moment, it was easy to forget the world beyond the doors. My hands were shaking just a little, but I pressed them together, determined to hold on to that feeling. The room was buzzing with that quiet anticipation, a hush that felt electric. My makeup artist dabbed and brushed, adding the final touches that would make me picture perfect. I caught my reflection and saw a woman who looked like she had everything she'd ever wanted. I tried to breathe deeply, to stay in that place of calm, thinking about the vows I'd written. Words of forever and faith whispered in the dark. But just as I let that thought steady me, my phone buzzed in my hand. A sudden vibration that snapped me out of my perfect day. I glanced down at the unknown number lighting up my screen. One message, then another. Each one cracked the fairy tale I'd built, and each crack let the truth in. I froze for a moment, the phone feeling like a weight in my hand. My breath caught in my throat as I opened the first message. A picture. My heart thudded so loudly in my ears, I thought everyone in the room could hear it. My fingers felt numb as I swiped to the next image. Another, and then another. Each one a small dagger in the heart of this day I'd built. My maid of honor was still chatting about how perfect everything looked, but her voice sounded like it was coming from far away. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I wanted to stay in that room, in that dress, with that music playing softly in the background. But the truth was there, pixel by pixel, and it was impossible to look away. I glanced up at the mirror, my reflection suddenly unfamiliar. I didn't look like the woman who was about to walk down the aisle to a man she trusted. My lips trembled, but I pressed them together, refusing to let tears spill. I had always been the one to see the best in people, to believe in promises and forever. But in that moment, forever felt like a lie. My mind was racing, questions and memories and doubts all crashing together. I thought about the late nights he said he was working, the moments when he'd pull away from my touch, the smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe I'd known all along, but I'd been too in love to see it. I took another deep breath, the air in that small room feeling too tight around me. I could hear the soft hum of the music outside, a distant echo of a dream that was slipping away. My phone was still in my hand, the messages still glowing on the screen, undeniable and final. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just my wedding day. It was the day I would decide who I was going to be. And I wasn't going to be the woman who walked down that aisle blind. My heart was pounding, but there was a strange calm settling over me. Each photo was a crack, and each crack was a promise. I would see the truth, and I wouldn't let it break me. I tucked my phone into the folds of my dress, the cold weight of it pressing against my ribs like a secret I had no choice but to carry. My maid of honor was still fluttering around me, fixing my hair, smoothing my dress, telling me how beautiful I looked. And I nodded, let her words wash over me like warm water. But inside, I was 1,000 miles away. My heart was hammering with every breath, my mind caught between the woman I'd been when I woke up and the woman I was in this moment. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the future shimmering in the distance, but the ground crumbling beneath my feet. And yet, even as the world tilted, I found a strange strength in the silence. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, if I would walk down that aisle like nothing had happened, or if I would find a way to make the truth ring louder than any wedding bell. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let this day be a lie. I thought about the girl I'd been all these years, the girl who believed love was enough, who thought she could build a life on trust alone. And maybe she was still in there somewhere, but she wasn't the one holding the phone right now. No, the woman I was becoming felt different, sharper, more resolute. She knew that some fairy tales weren't meant to have happy endings, and that was okay. The music outside kept playing, soft and lilting, a reminder that life was still moving on even when your heart was breaking. I took one last look in the mirror, my eyes searching for the woman who would walk out of that room. She looked back at me, a stranger and a sister, a fighter and a dreamer. My hands were steady now, my breath a little calmer. The day was still beautiful, the sun still bright, and maybe that was enough to start over. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this end with me standing in silence. When I opened those messages again, my hands felt ice cold, but my mind was crystal clear. The pictures showed Ethan in moments I had never been part of. Soft smiles that weren't for me, touches that had nothing to do with the life we'd built together. Each image felt like a slow, deliberate unspooling of everything I thought I knew. My chest tightened, but instead of falling apart, I felt a kind of steel slide into place inside me. My breathing slowed, my vision sharpened. These weren't just photos. They were the final proof. And I deserved to know every last detail before I said I do. The last message was the worst, the final punctuation on the lie he'd been living. You deserve to know before you say I do. It felt like the whole world stopped in that moment. The music in the chapel, the gentle murmur of guests outside the door, it all fell away, leaving just me and those words glowing on my phone screen. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, a steady drum that kept me anchored even as the truth threatened to pull me under. I took a shaky breath, let the weight of those words settle into my bones. I wasn't sure who had sent them, but in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I knew, and I couldn't unknow it. I looked around the little room, my gaze landing on the white flowers, the soft blush of the bridesmaids' dresses, the delicate lace of my gown. All of it, beautiful, hopeful, pure. And yet, none of it could cover up the ugliness of what was happening. My fingers traced the edge of my phone as I thought about the promises I was supposed to make in just a few minutes. Promises that would mean nothing if I was standing there in the dark. My mind raced, but I felt my body ground itself in that decision. If he thought I would stand at the altar blind, he was about to see just how clearly I could see. I felt the weight of the dress around me, the scratch of the lace against my skin. Every detail of the day I'd once believed would be perfect. But none of it could distract me from the truth anymore. I closed my eyes for a second, listening to the quiet hum of the world just beyond the door. The laughter of guests, the clink of glasses, the soft murmur of people who thought they were here to witness a love story. My hands were steady as I opened my phone one last time. Each photo was a shard of glass, but I refused to let it cut me down. I would gather every piece and build something new, something honest, no matter how sharp the edges felt. For a moment, I let myself remember the nights when he held me close, the promises he whispered into my hair. I remembered how I had believed him when he said forever, how I had built a home in my heart with those words. It was a soft place, a safe place, but it was also a lie. And lies, no matter how sweet, can't hold up a life. My lips pressed together as I pushed those memories away, not because they didn't matter, but because they did. They were the proof that I had loved with everything I had, and now I would have to love myself enough to walk away. I took another breath, the kind that fills every inch of your lungs and makes you feel a little stronger. My heart was still pounding, but I felt calm in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't know what would happen when I stepped out of that room, what he would say, how he would look at me when he realized I knew. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let this lie be the last word. My voice would be the final proof, and I would speak it with every bit of love and fury in my heart. I slipped my phone back into my dress, its presence a steady beat against my ribs, reminding me of the truth I was carrying. Outside the door, I could hear the music shift, a soft swell of strings, the kind of song that was supposed to make hearts soar. But for me, it was just a backdrop to the quiet decision I'd already made. My reflection in the mirror looked so calm, so sure, but I could feel the storm just beneath my skin. My fingers clenched into fists at my sides, not in anger, but in a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this be the day I broke. The room felt smaller now, like the air itself was holding its breath along with me. My maid of honor peeked in, asking if I was ready, her eyes bright with excitement she thought I shared. I managed a smile, soft and practiced, the kind that had always come easy to me. But inside, I was already standing on a different path. I thought about the girl I was when I said yes to him, how hopeful she'd been, how sure. And I thought about the woman I was now, with her eyes wide open and her heart still strong enough to beat. I took one last look around the room. The flowers, the soft glow of the lights, the hush of anticipation that was supposed to feel like magic. It was still beautiful, in its own way. And maybe that was the hardest part. How easy it would be to pretend, to slip back into the fairy tale and let the lie carry me down the aisle. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. My pulse thrummed steady in my ears as I took one step toward the door, the first of many. I didn't know how this day would end, but I knew I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. I stepped out of that room and into the light of the chapel, my breath catching as the music washed over me. The world felt like it had slowed to a hush, every footstep echoing in the space between my heartbeat and the steady thrum of resolve. My hand gripped the bouquet so tight my knuckles ached, but I didn't loosen my hold. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, each face turned with soft smiles and hopeful sighs, seeing the bride they thought I was. But inside, I wasn't just a bride. I was a woman standing at the edge of the truth, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I saw him at the end of the aisle, Ethan, his smile as bright and easy as if he hadn't shattered the life we were about to share. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and for a moment it was almost enough to believe in the fairy tale again. But then I remembered the pictures, the messages, the way my heart had clenched around the truth. I let my eyes meet his, steady and unblinking, and I saw the man I had loved, and the stranger he'd become. My feet kept moving, step by step, the music wrapping around me like a promise I hadn't made. The air smelled of roses and candle wax, soft and sweet, but it couldn't cover the sharp scent of betrayal in my mind. Each step felt deliberate, a choice to keep walking forward, even though the ground felt like it could give way beneath me at any moment. I could feel the tremble in my legs, the tightness in my throat, but I kept my chin lifted, my eyes locked on his. This wasn't just a walk down the aisle anymore. It was a quiet battle, a promise to myself that I would speak the truth, no matter how beautiful the lie looked in the flickering candlelight. I felt every inch of the aisle beneath my feet, each step a steady drumbeat in the hush of the chapel. The guests watched with soft eyes, their smiles gentle and warm, but they didn't know the weight I carried in my heart. My dress whispered around my ankles with each movement, the lace brushing against my skin like a memory of a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. My pulse was a steady hum in my ears, a quiet reminder that I was alive, and that sometimes living meant standing in the middle of your own heartbreak and refusing to look away. I clutched my bouquet tighter, feeling the cool stems pressing into my palms. My fingers curled around them like they were the only thing anchoring me to the ground. Ethan's smile never wavered, that same easy confidence he wore like a second skin. I wondered if he knew the truth already, if he could see it in my eyes. Or maybe he thought this was still the fairy tale, the perfect day we'd promised each other in late-night whispers and sunlit mornings. But I knew better now. I knew that some promises were just pretty lies, dressed up in white and gold. The music swelled as I reached the halfway point, the soft strains of the strings wrapping around my shoulders like a cloak. My heart stuttered in my chest, but I kept walking. I kept my gaze on him, on the man who had broken my heart before I'd even had a chance to say the words I'd written for him. And in that moment, I knew. This was still my day. It didn't matter that the fairy tale was in pieces. I would stand at the altar, but I wouldn't stand there blind. I had my voice. I had my truth. And I wasn't about to let him take that away from me. I could feel the warmth of the candles flickering against my skin, their soft glow a gentle contrast to the storm that churned inside me. The music rose and fell like a tide, each note a step closer to the moment I'd been dreading and craving all at once. My chest was tight, but my eyes were clear, sharper than they'd ever been. The last few feet felt like miles, but I kept moving, each breath a quiet promise to the woman I was becoming. I didn't know how he would react, didn't know how the room would change when the truth spilled from my lips, but I knew I wouldn't be silent. The guests rose to their feet as I neared the end of the aisle, their smiles soft and expectant. They thought they were witnessing a fairy tale, the final chapter of a love story they'd come to celebrate. But in my heart, I knew this was only the beginning of a different story, one that was messy and honest and real. I held my head high, feeling the weight of the letter tucked into my bouquet, the words I had written in the quiet hours of the night. They were my truth, my final stand, and I knew they would be the only vows I'd ever truly keep. I reached the altar and paused, my breath catching as I looked into his eyes one last time. There was a flicker there, maybe nerves, maybe something else, but I didn't let myself wonder. My voice felt like a secret I was about to set free, a steady flame in the middle of this beautiful lie. And as the music faded, as the room fell into a hush, I realized that this wasn't just a walk down the aisle, it was a reckoning. A promise to myself that I would speak the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And in that breathless pause before the vows, I held on to that promise like a lifeline. As the officiant's voice rang out, warm and gentle, asking me to read my vows, I felt my hands tremble, not with fear, but with something fiercer. My fingers tightened around the bouquet, feeling the crinkle of the paper hidden there, the weight of the words I was about to release. I looked at Ethan, his smile still so sure, so bright, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. My heart was a quiet thunder in my chest, each beat a promise that I wouldn't let this be another lie. I reached for the letter, unfolding it with careful fingers, and the hush in the room deepened. I felt the soft rustle of the paper, the quiet breath of the guests leaning in, curious and unsuspecting. My voice was calm when I began to read, every word tasting like steel and freedom on my tongue. These were meant to be promises for a lifetime, I said, the words echoing in the hush, turning every ear toward me. But instead, they're the words I'll use to set myself free. I didn't look at him, not yet. I kept my eyes on the paper, steady and sure, letting the truth pour out of me like a river finally unblocked. And as I spoke, I felt something shift inside me, something strong, something unbreakable. The room felt small and bright, the air electric with the crackle of truth. My voice was steady, each word deliberate, as I began to read the proof. Every message, every picture, every quiet betrayal laid bare for all to hear. I didn't flinch. I didn't waver. I read them like a prayer, not of hope, but of honesty. And as I spoke, I felt the fear in me unravel, replaced by a quiet power I didn't know I had. I wasn't just reading words on a page. I was telling the story of how I had loved, how I had trusted, and how I was done pretending that love was enough to blind me. The silence that followed each word was deafening, like the room itself was holding its breath along with me. My eyes stayed on the letter, the paper shaking just slightly in my hands, but my voice never faltered. I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on me, family, friends, strangers who had come to witness a love story. But I wasn't afraid of their judgment. I wasn't afraid of the gasps or the whispers that started to rise like a tide around me. I let them wash over me, each one a wave of truth crashing against the walls I had spent so long trying to build. I didn't let myself look at Ethan until the final proof was spoken, every lie laid bare in the bright light of the chapel. When I finally raised my eyes, I saw the shock there, the flicker of panic, the flush of shame. He tried to speak, his lips parting like he had an explanation ready. But I didn't give him the chance. My voice was a blade, clean and cold, cutting through whatever excuses he might have tried to offer. I wasn't interested in hearing how he'd justify the betrayal. This was my moment, my truth, and I wouldn't let him steal it from me. The guests shifted in their seats, their faces pale and stunned, but I didn't let their reactions sway me. I held the letter tighter, my voice ringing out in the quiet space. "This isn't the fairy tale you thought you were coming to see," I said, my tone even, but edged with something sharp. "But it's the truth, and I won't hide it." I could feel the calm settle deeper in my chest, a sense of finality that was almost soothing. I wasn't just breaking the vows I'd written for him. I was making a new vow, one that was only for me. I would never let myself be lied to again. I took a breath and folded the letter slowly, each crease a quiet act of closure. My hands were steady now, no more tremor, no more fear. I placed the folded letter back into my bouquet, the final words still echoing in the hush of the chapel. Around me, the guests sat frozen, their expressions a mix of heartbreak and awe. Some had tears in their eyes, others looked away, unable to meet the rawness of the truth I had laid bare. But I didn't let that stop me. My eyes stayed fixed on Ethan, holding his gaze like an anchor in the storm. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders slumped, his eyes darting around like he was trying to find a way to put the pieces back together. But there was no fixing this, no gluing the cracks of a love that had never really been whole. I felt a strange calm in that moment, like I had finally let go of the weight I'd been carrying for so long. My voice was quiet as I spoke the last words I would ever say to him in that church. I will never let myself be lied to again. They weren't just words, they were a promise, a line in the sand that I would never cross again. The hush of the chapel felt like a breath held too long, the kind that leaves you lightheaded and trembling, but I felt grounded, steady, as I took one last look around, the flowers, the candles, the faces of the people who thought they knew me. I realized that this wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about me. About the woman who had found her voice in the ruins of her own wedding day. And as I stood there, with the letter still warm in my hands, I knew that the story wasn't over. There was still more to be written, more to be claimed, and I was ready for every word of it. I took one last breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me like a soft, final curtain. Then I reached for his hand, not to hold it, but to press the folded letter into his palm. His fingers closed around it automatically, but I didn't let my touch linger. There was no tenderness left in that gesture. It was a parting gift, the final thread of a bond that had already unraveled. I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I had once loved, and found only a stranger staring back at me. And in that silence, I felt something inside me finally break free. I slipped the ring from my finger, its cold weight a reminder of everything I was leaving behind. My hand felt lighter without it, my heart a little less burdened. I didn't look back at the faces of the guests, didn't seek out their comfort or their judgment. This moment was for me and me alone. The soft murmur of shock rose around me as I turned away from the altar, not with the grace of a bride, but with the quiet dignity of a woman reclaiming her own story. My footsteps felt sure, each one a promise to myself that I wouldn't let this be the end of who I was. Outside the doors of the chapel, the sun was bright, the light warm on my face in a way that felt almost like a blessing. I paused on the steps, the cool breeze catching the hem of my dress, and let the weight of the past few hours settle in my bones. I had walked in expecting to find forever, and I had. But it wasn't the forever I'd planned with him. It was the forever I had promised to myself. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe freely. This was the goodbye he never expected, but it was the one I had always deserved. I felt the sun on my face like a gentle hand, warm and steady, and I let it fill the hollow places in my chest. The chapel behind me was a blur of white and gold, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the shocked faces, the murmurs of disbelief, or the man still clutching the letter like it was a lifeline. My heart was beating in a rhythm that felt like freedom, each breath a quiet victory. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the weight of the moment lighten with every footfall. I didn't know where the path would lead, but I knew I was done living in someone else's story. I thought about all the little lies I had told myself to make it this far. How I'd convinced myself that love was enough, that trust could heal every crack. But as I stepped into the bright morning air, I realized that love without honesty was just another kind of prison. The cool breeze teased at my hair, lifting the veil from my shoulders, and I let it go. Let it flutter down the steps behind me like a final goodbye to the girl I'd been. She had dreamed of a forever built on fairy tales. I was dreaming of something else now, something real, something mine. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let myself feel it all. The ache of what I'd lost, the relief of what I'd let go. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't painless, but it was true, and that was enough. When I opened my eyes, the world looked a little sharper, a little brighter, like it was waiting for me to claim it. I didn't have a ring on my finger or a husband waiting at the end of the aisle. But I had my dignity, my voice, my freedom. And in that quiet, bright moment, I knew that was worth more than any I do. I stepped away from the chapel, each stride a quiet declaration that I was done letting someone else's lies define my worth. The morning air was cool and sweet, the sun warm on my skin like a balm. I didn't have a plan, no map for what came next, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. I was no longer bound by the weight of promises that weren't real. My heart felt like it had been broken open, but in that raw space, I could feel something new taking root, a quiet certainty that I was enough, just as I was. I walked to the end of the path, pausing for a moment to take it all in. The soft hush of the trees, the distant laughter of children playing in the park, the scent of spring in the air. It felt like the world was opening up around me, wider and brighter than it had ever been inside the walls of that chapel. I slipped the ring into my pocket, a tiny, heavy circle that had once meant forever. Now it was just a memory, and I was ready to let it stay there. My heart still ached, but it wasn't the kind of ache that pulled me under. It was the kind that reminded me I was still here, still standing. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The chapter was closed, the vows unsaid, the goodbye spoken in the hush of a crowded room. I carried the weight of that moment with me, not as a burden, but as a promise to myself, to never let anyone else's lies become my truth. As I stepped into the bright morning, I felt a quiet smile curve at the edge of my lips. Small, but real. I hadn't left with a husband, but I had left with my dignity. And that was worth more than any "I do."